New York, Texas, Louisiana, and Utah are making Linux illegal thanks to their age verification laws. Now, this is a little bit clickbait. They aren't straight up banning Linux, but they're going to be passing laws that make trying to develop a open source Linux system very unviable. Now, I'm still a little bit sick, so mind me, but this is a very important topic to me, and I'm trying to get my 3 videos a week out. So let's talk about this. First off, we need to talk about age verification versus age indication, because multiple states are passing laws like this, and some of them are verification and some of them are indication, and they're kind of getting grouped in as just age verification. So while both these laws, in my opinion, are trash laws, one of these types of laws is a lot worse than the other type of law. So let's start with age indication here. So this one, for age indication stuff, you're just setting your date of birth when you're setting up the operating system, and then there has to be an API that apps are able to access in order to do things like block adult websites if you're under 18 in a browser, things like that. So these laws to me are still bad, because this can set up age verification laws later getting passed down the road, because now you already have age indication, so that's the logical next step for some of these states. But you're still depending on the honor system. Like, most people are still just going to lie about their age when they're setting up their account, as people already are doing that with things like social media. And some of the states that have this right now are California, Colorado, and Illinois. But these are not as bad as the age verification laws, which these are the ones that basically make Linux impossible in the states that are passing these laws. So with these, you need to force some sort of age verification. I guess it can be facial recognition, but a lot of them are making you upload your ID. I remember one of these laws, you have to have a 95% accuracy rate when you're marking your age. The biggest thing about these laws is a small open source project like mine can't just add easy ID verification or age verification. You need servers for this. You may need some sort of AI to scan your ID, which, by the way, has privacy implications too, because now you're giving these third-party vendors access to your ID information, which is absurd for something that isn't a banking app. And I'm going to talk about these laws more in a second, but some of the states passing these types of laws are the ones I used for the title of this video: Illinois, Utah, Texas, New York. The Louisiana one, this one was already signed and is effective July 1st. This requires covered application store providers to verify a user's age category. So either they're a child, a younger teen, an older teen, or an adult, using commercially reasonable methods. And to have a parent account, it needs verification of you being 18 plus. And for minors, it requires an active link between a minor account and a parent account, which means you're going to have some sort of server-side account system in order to track all these relationships and parental consent things for every app download you have. Now, this is on an app store level, not a OS level, but the thing is, if you're building a Linux distro, you likely have a repository or easy access to something like Flatpak, and that means that in order to have app installation be a thing, you have to have this sort of account system. Now, Utah is also doing it at an app store level, and it requires commercially reasonable verification of the account holder's age and parental consent for every single app download or in-app purchases, which must maintain a real-time verification server that can ping a parent's device. So that means that this service, if I had my own laptop as a child and my parent had a laptop, it'd have to be able to show up on the parent's computer and allow a verified parent consent record to be transferred over to another computer, which again requires a account system and real-time verification. And keep in mind, all of these different types of laws are near impossible to implement on something like Linux, where packages are decentralized. You can get a package from a repository or Flatpak or Snap or an app image. There's just so many flaws to how this has to be implemented on a Linux system. And this law in Utah is also signed and effective May 7th. Texas. This law was attempted to be enacted back in May 2025, although it has temporarily been blocked by a federal judge and is currently in the appeals process, which is good, but this still may pass. This requires App Store owners to verify the age of every user in Texas, sorting them into under 13, 13 to 15, 16 to 17, and an 18 plus, and minor accounts must be affiliated with a verified parent account. This is another thing that requires massive server-side family link infrastructure, where app stores need to make an account that is connected to a different parent account, which would require creating a full centralized account system that currently doesn't exist for most Linux distros. Now, California is where the laws get a little bit more relaxed. This is signed and effective January 1st, 2027, and this just requires a age verification API built into the OS and kernel level. And while this is technically an age indication law, it also makes it so developers are not allowed to willfully disregard information that suggests a user is lying. And so some OS providers are building age assurance hubs that cross-reference device telemetry with account data to ensure that age signals are accurate. Now, luckily, I think that most Linux distros should be able to comply with this law because most Linux distros are not actually adding telemetry into their system, so they don't actually have any telemetry that they're willfully disregarding in order to know that a user is lying. So that's a good thing in this situation, but this still is a slippery slope, and depending on how California actually enforces this law, this could be a very bad thing. New York. This is an active bill right now that hasn't been signed yet, but this bill requires manufacturers and OS providers to conduct commercially reasonable age assurance at the point of device activation. And it mandates that the OS provide a real-time digital age signal via API to every website and app. This also forces the OS to maintain a persistent age category, being child, preteen, older teen, or adult. And again, this would require a mandatory system level connection to a identity verification authority to validate the signal before the user can even reach the desktop, which again, very unviable for Linux distros to add. Colorado, a law has passed Senate and is now moving to the House for the final vote, and this requires an OS provider to include a accessible interface at setup where you indicate your date of birth, similar to California. So this is an age indication law, and then the OS also has to have an API with a real-time age bracket. And Illinois, this law has been introduced but not yet passed, and this is very similar to the California and Colorado laws, but this one's a little bit more strict because it treats negligent violations where a child's lying and the OS isn't catching it as unlawful practice. Now, why are these laws stupid? Well, one, it should be the parent's responsibility to dictate what their child is doing on a computer. For example, I started using the internet when I was very young, but the things I was doing on the internet was I was learning how to code when I was young. I was getting into Linux, teaching myself new things, getting involved with the Linux community, and I wasn't doing anything that I wasn't supposed to be doing when I was that young. And that was because I had my parents looking over my shoulder, making sure I wasn't doing anything crazy. And a lot of people like me have gotten into programming and things like that when they are young, and some of these laws may prevent them from being able to do so. Additionally, these kinds of laws can have huge privacy implications. For example, age verification can be used for fingerprinting. And also for some of the verification laws, you need a government issued ID or some sort of AI facial recognition. And you don't know how secure these identity providers are. Like if you watched my Discord video, for example, you may have remembered that Discord had 70,000 government IDs leaked in a Discord data breach. Now, if these politicians really want to get this law passed despite all of the privacy implications, they don't have a way that these states can actually have their own government ID verification system. So maybe these states could implement some sort of open source way to verify IDs where the state is doing it, so the state knows that the IDs are being properly deleted and the state is providing all of the infrastructure. So an open source distro can end up using the state's infrastructure instead, and that is a way they can pass these laws without screwing over all these open source pieces of software. But I don't even think these laws should be passed in the first place to even get to this scenario, because to me this is a huge violation of privacy and even the First Amendment. I think I read somewhere that during the Texas laws, one of the debates, somebody said that this is like requiring people to be over 18 to access a bookstore, and that's exactly what this is like. Or even like you could make it so you have to be over 18 to leave the house without your parents because, oh no, they could be going out and hanging out with some drug dealers or something. You don't know who your kid's hanging out with. To me, that's the same vein as these laws. These are dystopian laws. Now, I'd also like to show off this article from Carl Ritchell, who's the CEO of System 76, who says that these are not technical nor legal challenges and that we should be instead educating our children about life with digital abundance. So in the state of Washington, this is somewhat controversial, but students have to go through like Flash, like sex ed training that basically teaches you about like safe sex. We could be doing something similar for safe internet use. things like that. Why not just put this into the education system? Why are we instead passing these dystopian laws that limit what people under 18 can do on the internet? And he points out that most System 76 employees were kind of like me. They got into installing Linux systems and creating accounts when they were under 18 and even started writing software and operating systems. And he points out that removing user limitations to the computer, such as lockdown platforms like Android and iOS, is why their whole company exists. And he also points out, and this is a great point, that you could just have your parent set the age for the child account that they create, and that's an easy workaround, very similar to how people use VPNs to get around the Great Firewall of China. He also points out that for the New York law, you're going to have to prove you're an adult to use a computer, exercise bike, smartwatch, or car if the device is connected to the internet, and forbid self-reporting. And a distro downloaded from the internet would technically make the downloader a device manufacturer, which means that the downloader could be fined here. And these laws are clearly made for platforms like iOS and Android, which could easily implement these laws, but is not written at all for any open computing ecosystem where anyone can install or distribute the operating system. Now, I'm not going to read this full article. I do recommend you reading this. And they do point out that System 76 is going to be complying with these laws, which I'm going to talk about in a second, but that they are very against these laws. Now, I'm the lead developer of the Linux distro project StillOS, so here is my current plan for this because I've been asked by a few people. For the age indication laws like this is something I can actually implement in an afternoon. I already have a quick setup tool feature that's built into StillOS, so I'm just going to make it geocheck if you're in one of these states where the laws is affected, and if it is, you just have to set your birthday, and I'll probably add some sort of dbus API to implement this. But this is an afternoon implementation for me. Like I said, I'm not promoting these laws, but some of these laws have enormous fines, and I'm a one-man team. I don't have lawyers. I would not be able to fight a lawsuit if a state were to go after me for this, so this is something I have to do. And as for the age verification, there's no way I can even implement this right now. I don't have the infrastructure. I'm not going to be paying a third party to add verification for a free OS that I'm not yet making any money off of. So to prevent myself from getting fined by these states, I'm going to have to geo-block downloads in these states and maybe even end up having to geo-block full operating system installations, and that is not what I want to do. I'm very against this law, but that's something I may have to end up doing so I don't get sued into oblivion by the state of New York, depending on how these laws are worded. But as more of these laws get enforced, I will be figuring out what I need to be doing for each state. But this is just unfortunate. I didn't become a Linux distro developer to try and have to tackle all these random age verification laws in certain states. I'm trying to build a better OS experience. I'm not trying to deal with any of this. So I think all of this is complete bullshit nonsense. And then some OSs can't even comply at all. I've been seeing people point out, like FreeDOS, for example. Here's a discussion from some of the FreeDOS guys, and they point out, as regards to FreeDOS and DOS in general, there is no such thing as a user account. Therefore, at no point will a user set up an account of the OS which would require such age-related information. There is also no such thing as an app store for FreeDOS. And then again, small Linux distros like mine are not going to be able to do any sort of ID verification where you're verifying an age legit that isn't any indication or honor system. So if you aren't Microsoft, Apple, Google, or Valve making SteamOS, maybe Red Hat or Canonical could implement something like this, but like even a Linux Mint couldn't. I'm not going to be able to for these states. We're just screwed over by these laws. And to me, this is a huge government overreach and possibly against the First Amendment. Now, that said, like I mentioned with the System 76 thing earlier, I've seen a lot of people saying that they're never going to buy System 76 hardware again, and they're going after System 76 for it. Even some other Linux projects are getting people going after them for saying that they're going to comply. But the thing is, like, as open source developers, a lot of us are small teams. We can't be affording to fight this or go to court. And take a business like System 76, for example. If they don't get complied and they get mass fines and their company has to be shut down, according to PitchBook right here, I don't know how accurate this is, but they have 59 employees. How would you feel if your getting fired from System 76, and the reason is that they decided not to comply with state laws that were passed, and their company's being shut down. That's 59 people that System 76 executives or whatever are going to have to sit into a meeting and say, I'm sorry, we're letting you go. This is out of our hands because our company's going bankrupt because of these laws. People's livelihoods depend on this, so I 100% understand why they're complying. And like I said, I can't fight this in court, so I intend on complying to the best of my ability. But instead of going after these businesses where their hands are completely tied, we should be contacting our lawmakers and trying to get these laws prevented. So that said, that's what I recommend going to do. In the description of this video, I'm going to have a bunch of different states with links where you can end up emailing people who are in power, whether that's the Senate or the state Congress or whatever. In the description of these videos, if you live in one of these states, go out, reach out to your representatives, make sure that this law does not get passed, because this would be devastating to the open computing ecosystem, all of open source, Linux, all of that. And these laws are cancerous and just should not be passed in any circumstances, in my opinion. With that said, this is a sad video that I've had to make. Hopefully this has been informative, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully I can make it on a more fun subject. If you like this video, you might like my video on Fluxer, which is this Discord alternative, because I did cover some of the Discord age verification stuff that is going on with that is very similar to some of the laws that are being passed now. And I'll see you guys in the next video.